Hello everyone, now we begin with the sound of wind through dry pine needles, the creak of an old fence gate left ajar, and the soft panting of a German shepherd on high alert. You're already there, standing just behind the sheriff, on the edge of nowhere. You smell rust, like old pennies in your mouth. A call came in, not an emergency, just a report from a utility worker who thought he saw something strange behind a thicket near County Road 9. Not exactly an address. More like a feeling. The deputy said it out loud first, it's like someone forgot time back here. Then you see him, an old man, rail-thin, slumped against the base of a massive sycamore tree. Chained at the ankle. Not with a symbolic chain, not metaphor or memory, but with cold, steel links sunk into the bark like roots. He's breathing, but just barely. His military jacket is so faded it looks gray, though the patch still says US Army if you squint. The skin around his wrists and neck is raw, as if he's been scratching, or maybe pulling at something only he can feel. You probably won't survive this story without questioning your neighbors, your history books, or maybe even your own silence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I always read those. Now, relax, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get into today's story. The call came in at 8:12 a.m., just after sunrise. Dispatch logged it as suspicious person possibly in distress. What they found was something far worse, and far older. The man was unconscious but alive, skin tight over bones, sunken eyes closed, mumbling something no one could decipher. Paramedics rushed in. The chain had to be cut with bolt cutters. Not rusted, but oiled. Maintained. Who chains someone like that and checks the links? They got him into an ambulance, but when they ran his name, Emmett Dorsey, no family came up. No address. Just a military pension check, cashed monthly from a P.O. box 2 counties over. The VA had records, but no notes since 2017. It was as if someone had carefully erased him from the modern world. Sheriff Alvarez didn't like mysteries. 30 years on the force had taught him that when someone's quietly erased, it's never an accident. And so he stood there, at the base of that tree, scratching at the back of his neck like he always did when something didn't line up. His K9 partner, Rook, sat beside him, ears twitching. Now. Here's where things get strange. Normally, a K9 waits for a cue. But Rook didn't. He growled, low and uncertain, then bolted toward the brush. Deputy Rhonda called after him, but Sheriff Alvarez held up a hand. Let him go. What the dog found was not another person. It was a circle of disturbed earth. Freshly turned. Shallow. A grave without a body. But there was something in it. Letters. Hundreds of them, wrapped in twine, yellowed and brittle. Rook lay beside the pile and waited. Emmett's letters, they were addressed to one name, Helen Tisdale. A name that meant nothing to the sheriff, but would soon mean everything. Back at the hospital, Emmett drifted in and out of consciousness. He muttered numbers. Coordinates. Once, he shouted, "Leave the girl alone." In a voice so filled with terror it startled the nurse. The sheriff tried to ask him questions, but Emmett wasn't there. Not really. His mind was somewhere back in a jungle, decades ago, whispering to ghosts. But his body had survived something very real. And someone in that town had put him through it, the strangest part. No one claimed to know who he was, a man who'd grown up there. Served his country. Worked at the lumber mill for years after. Lived in a little red house near the river. But now, ask around, and all you'd get were shrugs. I think he moved away. Didn't he die in Vietnam? Wait, you mean that Emmett? Silence. Deflection. Fear, someone was lying. The sheriff knew this kind of silence. He'd seen it after the school fire in '92. When half the town closed ranks to protect one man. He saw it after the lynching back in '63, when his own uncle came home covered in blood and said it was nothing but a bar fight. Silence is the glue of shared guilt. Sheriff Alvarez went back to the tree the next morning. The chain marks were still visible in the bark. Scars take time. Rook paced in tight circles, nose to the ground. Then he barked, once, sharp and decisive, and stopped in front of an old, rotting shed. Inside, they found a cot, a blanket, and 2 sets of boots, one small, one adult-sized. One used recently. Canned food. Water jugs. A thermos labeled WT. With a cartoon hawk etched into it. Whoever had kept Emmett alive had done so intentionally, and had been coming back. That meant two things: Emmett wasn't alone in this, someone still cared. Or pretended to, but why chain him, and why here, under that tree? Sheriff Alvarez radioed in. Get me everything we have on Helen Tisdale, alive or dead. Because that name, etched in 100 letters buried like treasure, was the only breadcrumb they had. Later that day, the sheriff stood at Emmett's bedside again. He held up one of the letters. Emmett stirred. Helen, the old man rasped, eyes fluttering open for a moment. She's coming, Alvarez said softly. But I need to know who did this to you first. Emmett's face twisted, not in fear, but in shame. She said I had to stay. To wait. Said it wasn't safe. Who said that? But Emmett was already gone again, swallowed by memory. The kind you can't outrun. The kind that sits on your chest at 3 a.m. and won't move until you scream. Back at the station, they analyzed the handwriting on the letters. Two distinct hands, Emmett's, and someone else's. A woman. Some signed HT, some not at all. Dates ranged from 1971 to 2019. One letter, dated just 3 weeks ago, simply read, "Don't come out until the dog barks twice." Now, remember this moment. Because that dog, the one who disobeyed protocol. He's about to do a lot more than bark. The next morning, Sheriff Alvarez watched Rook, the K-9 officer, with a strange mixture of pride and unease. Rook had never broken protocol before. He'd been trained to follow commands with military precision, the kind of discipline you could count on in the field. But yesterday, something had told that dog to move, without a word from his handler. And now, it was happening again. They were back near the sycamore tree, the air thick with the scent of turned earth and sun-warmed bark. Rook's ears perked, tail stiff. Then, with a low growl, he walked away from the site, not towards the woods, but toward the road. He paused. Looked back at the sheriff. Barked. Once, twice, it was the phrase from the letter, "Don't come out until the dog barks twice." Alvarez felt the hair on his arms rise. He followed Rook across the gravel and into the brush beyond. A narrow deer trail wound between tall reeds. Rook led the way, tongue out, every muscle alert. And then, about 50 yards in, the dog stopped and Saturday, and there she was, a woman in her 60s, maybe early 70s. Sat on a folding stool, hands on her lap, expression unreadable. Gray braid down her shoulder. Overalls stained with sap. She looked like someone's retired art teacher or a beekeeper. But her eyes were sharp. "You found him," she said. Alvarez nodded. "You Helen?" "No. I'm Tilda. Helen was my sister. She died in 2019. There was no emotion in her voice. No tremble or hesitation. Just fact, laid down like stone. "He still thinks she's alive," the sheriff said, watching her face for the flinch. "There wasn't one, he has to," Tilda replied. "That's the only way he'll stay safe." Safe. That word hit differently now. "Who chained him?" "I did." Rook growled low, and Alvarez placed a hand on the dog's neck. "Why?" Tilda stood slowly, stretching her back. "Because he wouldn't stop trying to go back." "To where?" "To save her." And just like that, the simple cruelty of a man found chained to a tree shifted into something far darker, and possibly more noble. Sheriff Alvarez gestured for Tilda to start walking, and she obeyed, leading them back to a small A-frame shed hidden behind a bramble thicket. Inside was a wood stove, a cot, a radio, and shelves stacked with Marie's survival gear. Not for 1 week. For years, he came back from the war with nothing but a duffel bag and Helen's letters, she said, sitting on the cot. Said he owed her his life. Wouldn't say why. Just that she kept him alive in country. Wrote him every day. Sometimes twice. When she died. He snapped. Alvarez looked around. "So you decided to..." "What, keep him in a tree?" "No," she snapped. "I kept him. I saved him. He was walking into town, accusing strangers, yelling about people who weren't there. I had no choice. Why not call us? Or the VA? You think they do anything for him? She asked. The same way they didn't after the war. After the mill closed. After his landlord kicked him out. Alvarez had no answer. He wasn't chained at first, she continued. He stayed because he trusted me. But then. He started sneaking out. Yelling at shadows. Digging in the field. Saying he had to get to Helen before the river turned red. I couldn't lose him to the streets. Or worse. The sheriff stared at her. So you locked him down? I anchored him, she said, defiant. Until I could get help. And you never thought maybe tying someone to a tree would end badly? Tilda looked away, jaw clenched. Better a tree than a jail. It's here the story begins to tear. Because you want to hate her. You want to scream, you don't help someone by chaining them. And yet, look at the shed, clean, warm, provisioned. Look at the boots by the door, one set barely used. She never meant to hurt him. But hurt him she did. Sheriff Alvarez called in backup and gently placed Tilda under arrest for unlawful imprisonment. She didn't resist. Just asked, quietly, can you make sure he gets the letters? He needs to know she forgave him. Forgave him for what? Tilda didn't answer. Back at the hospital, Emmett was still weak, but clearer. He held the letters close to his chest like a life vest. I saw her once, he whispered. After the firefight. Half her face was blood. She still smiled. You mean Helen? The sheriff asked. No, Emmett murmured. The girl in the village. She died anyway. I left her. I left them all. The pieces were scattered, but Alvarez was starting to see the edges form. That night, Rook did something else strange. He lay down in the hallway outside Emmett's room and didn't move. No matter how many times the sheriff called him, the dog wouldn't budge. He just stared at the door, alert. Not anxious. Not guarding. Waiting. Twice, during the night, nurses walked by and swore they heard footsteps in the room. But the monitors never blipped. And Emmett remained asleep. By morning. He was sitting up. Holding a photo. Helen's. She told me to stop blaming myself, he said, voice rough but steady. Said I'd already paid enough. The sheriff sat beside him. Tilda said you wouldn't stop trying to go back. That true? Emmett nodded. You don't come home from war. Not really. You just bring it back with you and try to convince everyone it's luggage. Why the tree, Emmett? He closed his eyes. It was ours. Mine and Helen's. She carved our initials there before I left. Said it'd keep me grounded. First place I went when I got back. Last place I remember feeling human. The sheriff stood, stunned into silence. Rook padded in and placed his head on Emmett's lap. For a moment, it looked like the old man might cry. But instead, he whispered something into the dog's ear, thank you. Whatever happened next wouldn't involve arrests, or trials, or headlines. It would start in a backyard, and a grave without a body, and a dog who listened when no one else would. The town didn't want this story told. You could feel it in the way the diner waitress changed the subject when Sheriff Alvarez asked if she remembered Emmett. Or how the town clerk lost a decade's worth of property records when he requested files on the Dorsey family home. Even the church deacon, who used to run with Emmett in Little League, suddenly claimed he'd never known the man that well. But silence has a way of revealing itself, like ink in lemon juice held over a flame. You just need enough heat. That heat came in the form of a high school janitor named Wendell Price. He showed up at the sheriff's office 3 days after Tilda's arrest, hat in hand, trembling like someone with a ghost in his pocket. I heard what happened to Emmett, he said, eyes down. I need to tell someone something. They sat in the back room, just Wendell. The sheriff, and a recorder no one turned on. He saved my life, Wendell began. And not just mine. In 1972, Wendell was 13. A black kid in a nearly all-white town, back when that still meant you had to enter the movie theater from the side door and couldn't sit on the stools at the drugstore counter. His father worked the same lumber mill as Emmett. One Friday, Wendell got jumped behind the gym by 3 older boys. Said he'd been looking too long at white girls. Said they were going to teach him what happened to little animals that forget their place. Emmett drove by. Stopped his truck. Got out, No one knows exactly what he said, Wendell doesn't remember it clearly. Just that the boys backed off, and Emmett walked him home. He didn't say much, Wendell whispered. But he walked me right to my porch. Didn't care who saw. After that, they left me alone. The sheriff sat very still. Why didn't you tell anyone before? Wendell laughed bitterly. Tell who? The town that covered up a lynching in '63? They would have buried me before admitting one of their own went against the grain. It was the first real crack in the town's armor. And once it opened, the others followed. Mrs. Greta Morrison came next. A widow, 74, lived 2 streets over from the old Dorsey place. Emmett used to bring my husband fresh tomatoes in the summers. After Roy lost his legs, we couldn't keep a garden anymore. Emmett planted one for us. Called it Rent for Kindness. Didn't want a dime. Then came Father Alden. A letter, slid anonymously into the mail slot at the sheriff's office, detailed how Emmett had once come to confession shaking and silent. Said he'd let people die. Begged the priest to tell him how to live with it. The priest told him to give back to those he could still save. So Emmett did. Quietly. Off the record. An anonymous scholarship for the town's only native student in '89. An envelope of cash to help a teenage girl escape her abusive father in '96. Gas money for a single mother trying to get her GED. Always unsigned. Always dismissed. You never notice the angels, the sheriff muttered, reading the letters. Because they don't wear wings. They wear calluses. But Emmett had one more secret. It came from a dusty metal box buried in the crawlspace of the Dorsey house, long abandoned, technically condemned. Alvarez, with Rook beside him, pried open the old wood paneling and found it. The box contained military reports, photos from Vietnam, and a single medal, a silver star. Emmett had never told anyone he was a decorated war hero. The citation described an ambush near Da Nang. A village caught in the crossfire. One of the villagers, a girl, maybe 16, was shielding children behind a crumbling wall. Emmett dragged her to cover, took shrapnel to the leg doing it. She bled out anyway. But the kid survived. One of the photos, scorched and water damaged, showed Emmett holding the girl's hand as she died. The date matched the day Helen's letter said, "Don't lose yourself over something no man could have changed. You saved what you could. That's all the good Lord asks." And here's the gut punch. Alvarez found a second name on those documents, WT, the same initials on the thermos found in the shed. The same boots in the corner. The second person who had been there, watching over Emmett. A second veteran, Wesley Trent, a fellow soldier. One who'd saved Emmett in the field, then disappeared from the records. But when Alvarez pulled Wesley's file, he found a grim truth: discharged under unspecified psychiatric distress. No forwarding address. No next of kin. Except a note in the VA file, dated 1985, will be staying with Dorsey. For 40 years, Wesley had stayed hidden. Lurking in the shed. Living half in, half out of the woods. He was the one who had cooked for Emmett, maybe even helped build the bunkers and shelters near the sycamore. A quiet guardian. Perhaps, the only one who understood what Emmett was trying to escape, and why it never worked. Wesley's body was never found. But his hat was there, nailed to the tree's lowest branch, with the words, "Still here. Still watching." Now, with the town's silence broken, the sheriff brought Emmett home, not to a hospital. Not to a nursing home, to his own house. He set up a bed in the back room. Brought in a TV, and let Rook curl up beside him. Deputies brought food. Neighbors stopped by with flowers, pies, folded notes. The mayor sent a letter. Weak, diplomatic, full of words like regret and respect. But real justice? It didn't come from a mayor. It came when Wendell showed up again, this time with his grandson. "This," he said to the boy, placing a wrinkled hand on Emmett's arm, "is the man who made your granddaddy safe." The boy nodded. Gave Emmett a baseball card. "You like the Braves?" he asked. Emmett smiled for the first time in days. "Always have." Outside, Rook barked, twice. Sometimes, the sound of a dog barking twice is just a coincidence. But sometimes, it's the sound of something sacred, a promise kept, a burden lifted, a signal that the circle is closing just right. Sheriff Alvarez didn't want to read too much into it. But ever since that second bark, things had begun moving with a kind of quiet grace. Emmett began talking more. Small things at first. Weather. Baseball. Rook's antics. But then he told Alvarez something that nearly broke him. "I used to dream of the river," he said one evening, staring out at the sheriff's backyard where the light filtered through cottonwood trees. "I'd be standing at the bank, and I'd hear her, Helen, calling from the other side. Said the water turned red after I left her." "You didn't leave her," Alvarez said. "She passed years later. She wrote to you until the end." Emmett shook his head. "Not Helen. The girl in Vietnam. I never knew her name. She was all bones and fire. She looked at me like I was already a ghost. I should have stayed with her. Instead, I ran. But you saved her family. I don't know. Maybe." He tapped his chest, where the silver star used to be. "They gave me a medal for that. A medal for surviving what I couldn't save. Do you know what that feels like?" Alvarez didn't. But he listened. And that was enough. Then came the town meeting, not official. Not advertised. Just word of mouth. Folded chairs in the middle school gym. Maybe 24 people. And for the first time, they didn't pretend, they talked. Wendell stood up and told his story, eyes wet, hands shaking. Greta Morrison passed around a photo of her garden, Emmett's tomatoes still thriving after all these years. Even Father Alden, worn and weary, took the mic. "I failed him," he said simply. "He confessed a sin he didn't commit. And I gave him penance instead of peace." By the time the mic got to Sheriff Alvarez, the silence was trembling. "I don't want applause," he said. "I want acknowledgement." Emmett Dorsey wasn't a vagrant. He wasn't some lunatic chained to a tree. He was a soldier. A hero. And he's one of us. They voted that night, unanimous, the town would build a memorial. Not for war. Not for soldiers. For forgotten kindness, a small plaque at the base of the sycamore tree, "Here stood a man who never left the fight." Not for country. For conscience. Meanwhile, Tilda's trial moved quietly. The DA, once poised to press charges for unlawful imprisonment, was now fielding letters from townspeople begging for leniency. Even Emmett, in a rare courtroom appearance, raised his voice to say, "She did what she could. When no one else would." The court ruled in favor of supervised probation and community service. Tilda was required to attend counseling in support groups for caretakers of veterans. She did so without complaint. "I don't regret loving him," she said once. "I just regret thinking love was enough to fix him." Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked Emmett if he forgave her. He looked at the sky. Then at Rook, sitting obediently at his side. "She kept me alive," he said. "In her own way. And maybe now, I can finally start living." Then came the unexpected visitor, a woman named Ton Nguyen, arriving from California, clutching an envelope yellowed with time. She was the daughter of one of the surviving children from the village Emmett had tried to protect. She'd been told about the soldier who'd saved her mother when she was just a baby. For decades, she thought he'd died in the war, but her mother, on her deathbed, gave her the envelope. Inside was a photo. It was the same one Sheriff Alvarez had found in the crawlspace. Ton handed it to Emmett. "She said you were the reason I was born." He stared at the photo for a long time. "She didn't make it. But we did," Ton replied. "Because of you." They hugged. No cameras. No applause. Just a quiet release of pain. 50 years old, Ton returned a few weeks later with her teenage son. He sat beside Emmett for hours, asking about the war, the letters, the dog. Before he left, the boy asked, "Did you ever feel like you made it back home?" Emmett's answer was soft, "I think I'm getting there." Then, something no one expected, Rook started sleeping in the living room. He'd always been a shadow to the sheriff. Loyal. Present. But now, he chose Emmett's room less and less. As if, somehow, he knew his job was done. Alvarez found Emmett in the kitchen one morning, feeding Rook bacon. "He's tired," Emmett said. "But happy." That night, Rook didn't bark. He just lay quietly on the porch, watching the stars, and Emmett sat beside him, talking about Helen, the river, and peace. Autumn rolled in with a softness that year. The kind that wraps porches in amber light and makes you forget that the world can be cruel. Leaves crunched beneath quiet footsteps, and the sky held that silver hush that comes before snow. Emmett began sleeping through the night, not always, but more often. The night terrors, once like clockwork, grew quieter, less vicious. Sheriff Alvarez stopped waking to the sound of Rook's frantic paws against the hardwood floor. The old dog still kept his post, but his vigilance had turned into something gentler, a comforter rather than a sentinel, and Emmett smiled more, not the forced, thin-lipped grimaces people wear when they're trying not to cry. No, these were real, full, crinkled, eye-squinting smiles. Like the ones from an old photo Tilda had tucked into the side of Emmett's Bible. Young Emmett, in uniform, arms around Helen, laughing at something only the two of them understood. That photo now lived on the sheriff's mantle, next to Rook's leash and Emmett's silver star. Then came the first frost. Emmett was sitting on the porch wrapped in an army blanket, thermos in hand, WT's thermos, now refilled each morning with coffee just the way he liked it, strong, bitter, hot as judgment. Sheriff Alvarez sat with him. No one's ever going to believe this story, the sheriff muttered. Good, Emmett replied. Some stories are meant to be lived, not told. But even as he said it, he reached into his lap and handed Alvarez a folder. Inside, his letters, hundreds of them, to Helen, to Wesley, to the girl in Vietnam whose name he never knew, to a God he wasn't sure was still listening. They kept me alive, Emmett said. Now maybe they'll keep someone else alive, too. When Emmett died, it wasn't tragic, it was quiet, a good death, if there's such a thing. He passed on a Tuesday morning in his sleep. Rook at his side. The thermos still warm. His hand resting gently on the letter he'd never sent, addressed to whoever still believes in kindness. The town held a funeral, not in the church. Emmett had never been a man for sermons. Instead, they gathered under the sycamore tree. The one where he'd been found, chained and forgotten. The one where Rook had barked not out of fear, but as a warning, don't look away from this. There were no fancy eulogies. Just stories. Greta talked about her tomatoes. Wendell held up the baseball card and left it on Emmett's casket. Father Alden read from the Psalms, hands shaking, voice breaking, and Tilda, she stood in the back, away from the crowd, tears running silently down her cheeks. Later, she approached the sheriff. He found peace, she said. That's more than most of us get. The sheriff nodded. You gave him that? No, she replied. He gave it to himself. I just stayed long enough to witness it. The memorial under the sycamore went up the next spring. It was modest. Emmett wouldn't have wanted anything else. Just a bronze plaque, Rook's pawprint pressed in one corner, and the words, he never left the fight. Not for war. For love. People started coming, veterans from neighboring counties. Young people looking for meaning. Families tracing threads of forgotten history. Tan Nguyen returned every year with her son. They'd sit under the tree, pour coffee from the old thermos, and read one of Emmett's letters aloud. It became a tradition, a whisper through the roots of something too big for words. And Rook, he lived 3 more years, wandered the grounds. Slept by the sycamore. Occasionally followed the sheriff into town, but mostly, he just waited, and when his time came, he was buried beneath the tree, beside the man he'd guarded so fiercely. 2 headstones now. Side by side, Emmett Dorsey, 1938 to 2024, you can't chain a soul that's already free. Rook, good boy. Always. Now, people come from everywhere, some to pay respects, some to ask questions no one else will answer. And some, just to sit quietly and listen to the wind moving through the leaves, because in that hush, if you sit still long enough, you'll hear it, not a bark, not a voice, but a presence, the kind that reminds you, kindness survives. Justice waits. And sometimes, even in the darkest corners of forgetting, there's a story that insists on being remembered, a story like this one, a story you won't survive unchanged. And now, dear listener, we draw the curtain gently over this chapter. Let the rush of the world pause just for a little longer. Feel how the air settles into a softer hush, like a slow exhale at the end of a long, hard day. There's a weight to what we've shared, a story bound not just by hardship, but by the quiet echoes of human grace. Maybe you're sitting somewhere familiar, on a couch, in your car, or under a fading sky. Maybe you're holding this story like a stone in your palm, warm from the telling, heavy with meaning. That's the thing about lives like Emmett's, they don't clamor for your attention. They just ask to be remembered, So, if your heart feels a little fuller, if the silence around you hums a bit more tenderly, let that be enough for now. Let it be a sign that kindness still roots itself even in forgotten ground. That even a soul buried beneath shame and silence can bloom again under the right eyes. Thank you for sitting with me through this. For not looking away. For staying. Until the next time, take care of the ones beside you. Say what you need to say. And when someone tells you a story, listen like it might be the only one they've ever managed to say out loud.